We've talked in previous segment about the state of education funding in Arizona, and there have been some recent developments. The courts have ordered the Arizona legislature to start paying inflation. The legislature has refused to do this for neighborhood schools, even though it's required by Prop 301, and so a lower court ordered them to start doing it. Rather than just agree to do it, they have now appealed that decision to the Arizona Supreme Court, and the Arizona Supreme Court recently decided to take the case. They're going to hear arguments on July 23rd, but it begs the question as to why the legislature, when the law is pretty clear on this, isn't just going to pay the inflation, be done with it, and instead taxpayers are now going to have to pay attorneys to appeal this case needlessly. The legislature has really in effect admitted that they're going to have to pay inflation because that's all they have budgeted in the current budget that was passed by the Senate, and if passed by the House would only allocate $82 million for K-12 education for the coming school year. Remember that in the past 4 years, the legislature cut $1 billion from K-12 education, almost 22%, the biggest cut in the nation. All that they're going to put back is $82 million, and really in doing so acknowledging that the courts are going to require them to do so anyway. But why fight this? Why are we spending taxpayer money to take this all the way up to the Arizona Supreme Court? It doesn't make sense. Another study that came out this week sheds more light on how Arizona fares in terms of its dismal state of education funding. The U.S. Census report, so hardly a biased agency, releases a yearly study on education funding. And what it showed is that Arizona ranks 47th in the nation in the amount spent per child. Now, you'll hear a lot of erroneous information from groups like the Goldwater Institute, from politicians like Senator Al Melvin, about Arizona spends $10,000 per student, okay? This is another myth that needs to be busted. Arizona itself, the state, spends $3,200 a student. Now, let's look back just 4 years ago at what Arizona was spending. Arizona was spending $4,500 per student just 4 years ago. So in that short period of time, the amount has dropped 27%. We now spend $1,200 less than we did just 4 years ago. And we know what that means. It means bigger class sizes. It means closed schools. It means teachers being laid off. It means not enough money for supplies. But what are we restoring? Are we restoring, $1,200 per child? No, we're restoring $82 per child. That's all the legislature is putting back this year. It's not sufficient, but they don't care. There are some other interesting facts that came out of the census report, and one of them helps bust another myth, that Arizona somehow is wasting all of this money on administrative expenses. So we hear this a lot, that there's really plenty of money in education. It just is not being wisely spent by school administrators. Actually, you know what? Arizona school administrators are doing the best job in the country. They spend less, the lowest in the country, on school administrative expenses. We are 51st because they include in Washington, D.C. They only spend $315 a child at the school level. That is the lowest in the country. So the next time you hear from an anti-education legislator that there's plenty of money there, it's just being wasted by administrators, don't believe it and question them and point out this census report, which shows that that is just factually completely inaccurate. The final piece of the census that I think is very interesting to note is the amount that's actually spent per $1,000 on education. So this shows, relative to other states, what percentage of our income we're actually spending on K-12 education. Now, we used to be 45th just 4 years ago. We are now 49th with just $38 of every $1,000 earned spent on K-12 education. Is that sufficient? No, it's not. But is the legislature going to do anything about it? No, they're not. So That's the state of education funding in Arizona. Not a pretty state of affairs.